It was on the 29th of April 1945 that many German guards who had worked for the SS inside of the concentration camp of Dachau were huddled together by a wall. They had been captured following the liberation of the camp. Stood opposite them were many different US guards who had freed thousands of people in the camp. There had also been many SS guards who were battered and brutalized, some killed, all around Dachau. But then a series of gunshots were heard, and the guards stood opposite them were mowed down by a machine gun being operated by a young American guard. This was known as the Dachau Liberation Reprisals, and there were many SS guards who were executed and killed when the camp was liberated and freed. But what is the story behind this? On the 22nd of March 1933, Dachau concentration camp was opened, and it was the first site which opened under the Third Reich and Hitler's government. The camp was to begin with intended to house political dissenters and those opponents to the Nazis, but as the persecuting laws of the Third Reich saw hundreds of thousands of people being thrown into concentration camps, these were innocent people, civilians who had no place to be locked up, but Hitler's government viewed them as needing dealing with. Dachau grew to become a huge site and complex where 100 sub-camps served the main site, and the prisoners inside of the camp were ordered to work themselves to death, and there were many others who were executed. Inside of the camp, there was also a number of brutal and horrific torture methods used upon the prisoners. Devices such as the standing cells, tiny oubliette-style dungeons, were used to increase the suffering of people, and there were regular public floggings in which prisoners who had infringed on the camp rules were battered, sometimes to death. Gallows also carried out public prisoner executions at roll call every day, and the guards would patrol their work detachments with such fear that they willingly pulled out their pistols and shot into the prisoners to make them work harder. They also threw the caps of the prisoners into the electrified fences and forced prisoners into the fence to their deaths. Prisoners were also shot from the watchtower. As World War II continued, there were thousands of prisoners who were sent to Dachau concentration camp, and as the final months of the war came, the conditions of the camp became far worse, as it became rather overcrowded. There were a series of executions carried out at the site, as also high-profile prisoners were executed. There were even some capos, prisoners who were given some form of power, who became known for carrying out executions. But as the Germans were pushed back by the Allies and the Soviet Red Army, the Americans approached towards Dachau concentration camp, and they arrived in the April of 1945. And the Americans negotiated with Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, to give over the camp rather peacefully. The commandant of the site in the days before had marched 7,000 prisoners from the site, and anyone on the death march who could not keep up was shot at the side of the road and then left. But on the 29th of April 1945, members of the 3rd Battalion of the 157th Infantry Regiment and the 45th Infantry Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, arrived in the area close to Dachau. They discovered 39 railway boxcars stuffed full with over 2,000 bodies, and bodies there also lay all over the camp. Prisoners were emaciated and were mere skeletons who were walking around. There was a stench of death everywhere, and the commandant had abandoned his post and left an inexperienced man in charge of the site to surrender to the Allies. One man who liberated the camp claimed, "As we approached the southwest corner, 3 people came forward with a flag of truce. We met them about 75 yards north of the southwest corner. These 3 people were a Swiss Red Cross representative, Victor Maurer, and 2 SS troopers who said they were the camp commander and his assistant. They had come here on the night of the 28th to take over from the regular camp personnel. for the purpose of surrendering the camp to the advancing Americans. The Swiss Red Cross representative said there were about 100 SS guards in the camp who had their arms stacked except for the people in the tower. He had given instructions that there would be no shots fired and it would take around 50 men to relieve the guards, as there were 42,000 half-crazed inmates, many of them typhus infected. He asked if I were an officer. I replied, "I am Assistant Division Commander of the 42nd Infantry Division and will accept the surrender of the camp in the name of the Rainbow Division for the United States Army." Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower claimed that, regarding the liberation of Dachau, our forces liberated and mopped up the infamous concentration camp of Dachau. Approximately 32,000 prisoners were liberated. 300 SS guards were quickly neutralized. In Eisenhower's report, he mentioned the deaths of a number of guards. However, this was later known as the Dachau Liberation Reprisals. All around Dachau, there were a number of reprisal killings where the prisoners fought back during the liberation, and they turned against the former men who oversaw them for some cases years. Near to the back entrance of the camp, commander of one company, Lieutenant William Walsh, shot 4 Germans who surrendered in a boxcar, and a private climbed into the boxcar and then executed this former guard with a gunshot to the head. Some SS officers were discovered and they were walked to a different part of the camp and they were executed and shot. There were a number of guards close to the watchtower who were also executed. One witness to the proceedings said, "Prisoners caught the SS men. The first SS man elbowed 1 or 2 prisoners out of the way, but the courage of the prisoner mounted. They knocked them down and nobody could see whether they were stomping or what, but they were killed." There were a number of capos who wielded power of the prisoners who were turned upon, and the American soldiers ignored the actions of the prisoners who were executing those capos who had treated them awfully. But one of the most prominent executions inside of the liberated camp was at the hands of the American soldiers with their machine gun. SS guards had been rounded up and gathered near to an area of the camp which was used for storing coal. This area was surrounded by a thick wall, and these former guards were guarded by a group of machine gunners. A soldier was heard shouting, "They're trying to get away," and then the 19-year-old soldier who was guarding the former guards with his machine gun fired at them. It was claimed by Lieutenant Colonel Sparks that there were 12 dead SS guards, and the executioner was crying his eyes out. It was claimed that it was the foregoing incident which has given rise to wild claims in various publications that most or all of the German prisoners captured at Dachau were executed. Nothing could be further from the truth. The total number of guards killed at Dachau during that day most certainly did not exceed 50, with 30 probably being a more accurate figure. The regimental records for that date indicate that over 1,000 German prisoners were brought to the regimental collecting point. Since my task force was leading the regimental attack, almost all the prisoners were taken by the task force, including several hundred from Dachau. It was claimed that some of the Nazis were rounded up and executed along with the guard dogs, and that 16 SS men were shot, 17 were shot dead in Tower B, and a few more were killed by the US soldiers in reprisal shootings. Anywhere from 25 to 50 were killed by inmates. There were further killings, but what is surprising is that at the end of the Second World War, very few people faced action for the killings of the German guards of Dachau. Technically, these men were prisoners of war, and if they had surrendered to the enemy, like those men who were being guarded with a machine gun were, then they should have been processed and treated with some form of dignity, regardless of the barbarism and brutality of their actions during the war. There were some of former guards of Dachau concentration camp who were, during the Dachau trials, sentenced to death for their crimes, and they were then executed inside of Landsberg prison. There was a lot of anger when the camp was liberated, and it could be considered that some of the US soldiers actually turned their back on technical war crimes because of this anger. The SS were considered by them as the worst of the worst Nazis, but as mentioned, the Dachau liberation reprisal was kept rather quiet and was dealt with in a hush-hush fashion. All charges for those whose actions led to the deaths of the former guards were dropped and then dismissed. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.